Hello everybody, I hope you guys are having a great afternoon. Today we're going to be looking at a big nor'easter that could be climbing up the eastern coast, and that could be impacting parts of the eastern seaboard with some very gusty winds, and then also some pretty hefty rainfall, especially for the Carolinas and Georgia and Florida as well. Now, also, for this system, you could be seeing some snowfall and sleet for the interior northeast. Just want to point that out, and we will be talking about that more in depth on later in the video. Now, before we do get into it, though, please consider liking the video, subscribing, and turning on notifications so you never miss a video when I upload. Now, here's the National Weather Service page right now. And you see, we have some air stagnation advisories over parts of the northwest, including Idaho, parts of Oregon, and Washington. And then all across the eastern seaboard, you're seeing your gale watches, gale warnings, storm watches, storm warnings, some small craft advisories for winds, rough bar, all of that, hazardous seas, and then also some rip current statements. So just a mess over the eastern coast, especially the offshore areas. That's especially where you have your warnings. Now, we're going to talk about this nor'easter from the European model. And you see, we have this system starting to develop. This is your frame for right now what is happening. And you're seeing some sporadic thunderstorms, some of them moving onshore. This is typical of what we see in the Gulf this time of year. But it is going to track northeastward, and you're gonna have those winds coming out of the northeast, which it is technically making it a nor'easter. Really, I would classify anything that moves up the coast and is a large system, produces snow or rain, and has some fairly gusty winds, a nor'easter. But the scientific and your real way of knowing it's a nor'easter is by having a northeast wind from coming out of the northeast, and your low pressure developed, and usually it has to be about 990 millibars or less, which is a pretty deep nor'easter. Now we're gonna zoom into the eastern coast, and you see it's gonna start moving up, rising up the coast by about Saturday morning. Now Saturday midday, you're seeing still some pretty heavy rainfall for the Carolinas, and then by Saturday night starts to continue. And you see, this is where your low pressure is tucked in right over here, just parallel of Central Florida, and you're gonna really see how all this moisture, kind of like a comma head, which is what we like to see of if you want a big nor'easter or a snowstorm in the winter, and you see it's a comma head, and this is a really intense way. Well, this is a good way of knowing if it's an intense storm, and definitely is going to be an intense storm. You're going to have some pretty gusty winds. Now, for Cape Hatteras and parts of the Outer Banks, could be seeing some pretty gusty winds and some pretty heavy rainfall come Sunday morning, Sunday night, still over those areas, and departing by Monday morning. Now, this is when we're talking about sleet, freezing rain, snow over the parts of the interior northeast, and it's going to kind of move to the east a little bit, but then on the back edge, as another storm starts to develop, another storm is going to start developing here. We'll have to talk about that in a later episode or later video, but this is going to be funneling in that cold air behind this storm. So you're seeing all this freezing rain, snow, all that over these areas, and that's going to be leading to some pretty messy travel for your Tuesday morning. You see, really, this only happens in November or a late October snowstorm over the interior northeast, because in the winter you'll have pretty much almost just a little area of freezing rain, but the rest will be rain or snow. You have a pretty defined rain snow line, but in November storms, you'll have really a very messy atmosphere. You will have some very cold temperatures aloft, for example, then some pretty warm temperatures right in the middle of the atmosphere, and then at the surface you could have some moderate temperatures, maybe a 40 degrees. So maybe it's like, I don't know, 20 degrees up here, 30 degrees over here, and it's gonna be the perfect recipe for some messy travel, and this really only happens in October and November with snowstorms. Now it switches to pretty much all snow for the interior Northeast by Tuesday morning, and then departing by Tuesday midday and afternoon. Now, as we move into your sleet slash ice pellets from the European model, and this is just all the sleet, so that no snow, no rain on this map. Now, you're gonna see by about this would be for Monday night. You're seeing. I really think this is gonna be the bullseye after looking at the models. You're gonna have the bullseye really over this area, over north central Pennsylvania and into parts of upstate New York, about out central southern upstate New York, right along that Pennsylvania New York border. And that's where you could be seeing about 3/10 of an inch, half an inch in some areas per hour of sleet, or actually per 6 hour increment. Now, here's for the next 6 hour increment. So on top of the 3/10 of ice you just saw, this is another half an inch of ice. So that's about I would say 8/10 of an inch of ice over some of these areas, especially for that bullseye area, more leaning towards this northeastern Pennsylvania, south central New York border, where you could have the wettest, iciest commute for your Tuesday morning. Still some sleet over these areas come Tuesday midday or afternoon, but it really tapers off after that. Now here's your freezing rain, and usually freezing rain. Usually, we see this more than we do ice, because ice really has to be warmer air aloft. But with freezing rain, this is usually what we see during winter storms. And you see, we're gonna have a lot of that over the Appalachians, and then stretching into the interior Northeast. Really gonna go away for just about 6 hours or so, but then it's going to come back over the interior Northeast, and then it's going to come back very strong, maybe half an inch, 3/4 of an inch of ice from in just 6 hours over some of these areas. And this freezing rain is going to be really centered over the northern New England, and then into northern upstate New York, and then it's going to taper off by Tuesday morning. Now here's your total rainfall, and you see in those reds and yellows, that's indicating about an inch to 5 inches, so very heavy rainfall over these areas. And then you're going to see some pretty hefty rainfall over these areas as well, over the eastern coast. Now here's your snowfall, zooming in on the Northeast. So you're going to see generally about 2 to 5 inches of snowfall. And then once you get into more of southeast Canada, northern Maine, northern New Hampshire, you could be seeing about 6 inches, right around 6 inches. Some areas seeing more than 6 inches in isolated spots. Now here's the GFS model, and the GFS has this more north and west, or east, I mean, for this system. Now, it's gonna develop a closed low pressure quicker than not a closed low pressure, but a fairly nice looking low pressure system, a nice looking calm ahead by about Friday, about afternoon. This is way quicker than the European, which had it around Saturday time frame. And you're gonna see it's gonna be mainly the Outer Banks and eastern North Carolina that's gonna be seeing this rainfall. Some rainfall banding into South Carolina, but then you're gonna see really gonna focus in by Saturday night, Sunday morning. See very intense wind speeds and very intense rainfall over really just the Outer Banks of North Carolina, and then it's going to move up the coast into parts of the coastal Northeast, and then it's going to move out into southeastern Canada. Again, that freezing rain that we were talking about really going to engulf the northeastern United States. And the GFS model has more freezing rain and sleet than the European does, and that's just because it has it further off to sea, which leads this cold air just a little bit further to the west. So that's gonna lead some freezing rain over these areas, or I should say, this low pressure is a bit further to the west, which leads this cold air to be further to the west, leading to this freezing rain further. More freezing rain and sleet. So sorry about that mix-up. And then snow turns over just for a little bit over northern Maine, but not gonna last too long. Now here's your rainfall amounts, and you're seeing generally about 2 to 3, 4 inches of rainfall from this system. Now here's your snowfall forecast, and you're going to be seeing about 1 to I would say about 3 inches, 6 inches in some areas over northern Maine. Again, this does include sleet. So if you remember when we were looking at the actual precipitation, it did show a lot of sleet for these areas, and the only areas that really did transition were these areas. So if you're south and west of these areas, or east in some scenarios, then most of this will be in the form of sleet. But again, could have some slight changeover to snow, and I wouldn't be surprised if some of this did actually stick to the ground. Now here's your wind speeds quickly from the European model, and here's your max wind speeds through Tuesday. The brunt of these winds are going to be for Saturday and Sunday for these areas, and you're going to see just offshore, you're going to have wind speeds 80, 85 knots, which is about 90 to 100 miles per hour. So luckily, most of these models don't have this onshore. It's very hard to get these onshore, except for these Outer Banks, since they do like jut out just a little bit. They almost always get clipped by these systems. So potentially for those areas, seeing 50-mile-per-hour wind speeds or 60-mile-per-hour in some scenarios, but generally below the hurricane force threshold, but definitely some of these areas exceeding that. Now, here's the Northeast, and it will be pretty gusty, but not as gusty, nothing damaging really. Maybe 30-mile-per-hour wind gusts. Once you get into the higher elevations, Mount Washington over here is that 63-mile knot reading, and that's about 70-mile-per-hour, but Mount Washington, again, is very high in elevation, so they always see higher wind gusts than the surrounding areas. Anyways, guys, if you did enjoy that video, please consider liking the video, subscribing, and turning on notifications so you never miss a video when I upload. Anyways, thanks for watching. That was Eli's Weather Guy, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.